Thank you, thank you, thank you very much. And thank you to everyone here for coming to this talk, because I'm going to assume if you came out to this talk, which is why you should move to New Hampshire, you're at least considering that, which is really, really awesome. So thank you for coming out. So if we're clapping, let's clap for you guys instead of the guy on stage. Thank you, thank you. And this talk today is kind of the opposite of yesterday. So yesterday I talked about why the Free State Project will succeed. I was talking about it from the scope of the movement, why what we're doing as a group is going to work. This is the opposite. I want to talk today why you should be really, really selfish and move to New Hampshire, okay? Why moving to New Hampshire is in your own personal self-interest. Okay, so I might briefly talk on the fact, because it's fun to win, right? It's cool. That part's cool. But there's a lot of ways in which you can, I think, have sort of a better life or improve your personal situation just by being in New Hampshire, tomorrow. So it's kind of the opposite in that sense. And I find this to be kind of a weird talk to give, because describing this in a talk, it's like pitching you on like eating a sandwich when you could just kind of taste it. Like you're here, you're at PorcFest, right? You've kind of seen, not like life in the Free State is like this every day, but it's closer to this than it is in most places. And now I'm on stage kind of describing it, it's like you're here. You're kind of seeing it. I do want to hopefully make some points that maybe people aren't thinking about. And of course, there are people who aren't here who may hear this, and they need to come here. But that's actually my strongest recommendation, is that if you experience some of the stuff that happens here, it's, I think, going to answer questions and give you a much better taste of New Hampshire than kind of doing all of this online research and this kind of thing. I'm preaching to the choir again, because you guys are actually here. So I'm going to start with what I actually think is the weakest reason. And a lot of people have this at the top of their list. But I actually think the weakest reason to move to New Hampshire in terms of your self-interest is that, for most people, is the politics and the policies of the state. Now, that's a weird thing to say, because New Hampshire is the freest state in the country, okay? Cato ranked us the freest state in the country, and they used like 200 different factors. We blew the second state out of the water. We were like 10% above them, and then in the text it says, probably no one's going to ever catch New Hampshire. So that's weird, because it's the freest state. So why? Now, there are people, there's something that's highly specific to you in your life. But if we look at, as libertarians, right, how free, how little government we want versus how much government there is, right? You've got this continuum. The states, all of the states are jammed in here, right? Now, New Hampshire is the best out of that range, but in terms of the range, like, you're still going to pay 40% of your income to the federal government if you move to New Hampshire, right? Like, you're not going to get out of some of the worst aspects of government by moving here. It will be better. It will be better. But I think there are actually a lot of other reasons beyond this. And I got to tout New Hampshire, and I know I talk, because we have had a lot of victories. So I'm not saying New Hampshire is not, it's absolutely winning here. We cut taxes, we cut spending. Literally yesterday, there were 4 more bills signed by the governor that were pro-liberty. We just, as of yesterday, nullified federal gun laws. As of yesterday, it is officially illegal, not that the state was doing it, but it's officially illegal. The state is barred from hiring a private contractor and saying the private contractor has to require vaccinations or ask for vaccine information. The state can't do it. So all of it, and so, I mean, I can go on and on about this. I can talk about the micro-liberties, about how easy we made it to brew beer and how easy it is to sell food and all the things that you can do here. And if some of this stuff is, again, this is the selfish talk. I'm talking about so some of this stuff is highly personal to you. If this stuff affects you, if you wanted to start brewing beer, then there are these sort of policy reasons. You know, you're one of my reasons to move here, but you weren't till a couple of points later. Should I jump around? All right, so before I move on from politics and policy, I do think this stuff is important because this stuff is how we win over time. It shows that New Hampshire is winning. And this stuff does matter. It's good that you will pay less taxes here than you will in just about every other state. It's good that if we have a government, New Hampshire's government is at least ranked as the most effective, running for the least money, delivering the best services. All this stuff is good. But I'm telling you, in your personal life, this 5 to 10% stuff, oh, I'm paying, my net tax burden in New Hampshire is 5% lower. That's not going to be the thing that changes your life. That really, I'm a happier person, I'm a more fulfilled person because I'm now paying 5% less in taxes. That's an at the margin kind of thing. Let's talk about something that's not at the margin. Are you at the margin? No. So I think family is one of the strongest reasons. It was the strongest reason for me personally. I'm about to be a midwit and talk about what studies show, but studies show that, and it's some really convincing evidence, I'm not going to go through all of it, but that where you raise your children, the community in which you are embedding your children, is the most impactful and important decision you make as a parent. That is, because when you choose where you're raising your child, you are effectively choosing their peer groups. You're choosing the school that they go to. You're choosing the community and neighborhood they live in. You're choosing the people that they hang out with. You don't have to buy the full claim, but the full claim, which I think there's a lot of evidence for, is that this decision is more impactful than everything else you do as a parent in your household combined, at least comparing a sort of average parent to that sort of, to the range. Obviously if you're like, being very negative towards your kid, you can ruin them. But there's a lot of evidence that the peer group, right? My kids are running around with libertarians. They spent more time at PorcFest with other libertarian kids, with other libertarian families, because that's how kids actually live their lives. They're not with their parents all the time. And so, and kids pick up values from the community, not just from their parents. So I think this is really, really important. It was very important during COVID. Hopefully that will never happen again, but during COVID, Arthur still had a normal life, okay? And it's very easy, just about every city in New Hampshire, there are Free Staters there are going to be other families, and you'll be able to get into sort of pods or peer groups. I was home from work the other Friday, and there were 12 kids in my house, all right, and only 3 of them were mine. And this kind of thing happens all over the place. So it's very easy to find the other parents, and you can kind of work together and raise your family in a way that's a bit, a bit more communal. You might be less isolated or whatever. And it's also really nice to not be the weird parent, okay? If I was in Philadelphia still, I would have been the weird parent. You can see the way, again, at PorcFest, the way that libertarians tend to be a lot more comfortable with their kids, kind of being freer, making their own choices, letting them make mistakes, letting them learn from this kind of thing. And that's really nice, even so, because you're going to be parenting with other people who sort of share those libertarian values. So I think family has got to be one of the strongest reasons. If you have a family or are planning to have a family and you're a libertarian, I think it's actually kind of foolish to not be in New Hampshire. I want to jump around from family. I'll talk about work. What it's like working in New Hampshire. And I think, again, here, having that network of libertarians makes it possible to do things that might not be possible elsewhere. Obviously, New Hampshire has a very strong job market. There's jobs in just about every field. You have access to the Boston area metro if you're doing something that's highly specialized. So pretty much every job is possible. There is one guy on Twitter who keeps replying to the Free State Project talking about how he's like an oil driller and he can't drill oil in New Hampshire. I'm like, all right, that's fine. You've got a legitimate excuse. But pretty much every job can be done in New Hampshire in the Boston metro. If you're on the agorist side of things, then New Hampshire is incredible. Okay, if you like vending your stuff for Bitcoin and maybe you're not the most accurate in reporting to the federal government how much money you made, there are lots of opportunities to do this kind of thing in New Hampshire. We have these regular market days. Pretty much every major area in New Hampshire has one at least once a month where you're meeting up, selling goods. I'm able to buy locally sourced beef for Bitcoin in New Hampshire. That's very easy to do. And so you have these kinds of networks. This steers a little bit away from work, but I do think these kinds of networks are very powerful. especially if you're the kind of person who's concerned about the sort of downside of the future, of what might be happening if inflation runs hyper rampant or various sort of more downside scenarios. You're going to have a network here that's very dense, a lot of people doing things locally, and that's a very powerful thing to have if you're concerned about these kinds of things. And people do so many different things for work here. It's tough to cover all of them. Obviously, if you're into the homesteading or farming, there's a big community for that there. And then the other thing I want to mention under this umbrella is like all of the various sort of talent networks. There's a free stater, who kind of does everything. So if you're an entrepreneur in one area, whatever, you're a food vendor, it's going to be easy to find a Free State graphic designer who will make you a sweet logo. And this kind of, so, that we're all in this kind of community, you have these kinds of networks of talented people. Everyone sort of knows who to go to for the various services, because every entrepreneur is hiring other entrepreneurs to kind of accomplish that kind of thing, and we've got a great network here for that. And I think that's like, if you're on the entrepreneurial side of things, that's very powerful. I'm going to jump from work to the sort of social and community aspects of living in New Hampshire. This is, I think, a very, very powerful thing to do. If you guys are here at PorkFest, you were at a comedy show with hundreds of libertarians in the audience. Has anyone ever been to a comedy show outside of New Hampshire with over 100 libertarians in the audience? No, okay, I got one yes. So a couple, yeah. So yeah, that's true. And all right. So you guys were in Reno. All right. So, but the point is that this kind of thing is happening regularly. You get, getting 50, 100, more than 100 people out for events, and we've kind of got a libertarian version of everything. If you're into mountain biking, there's a libertarian mountain biking club. So whatever you're into, you're going to be able to do that kind of thing with other libertarians. And again, I think this feels really nice. There are lots of, I moved from Philadelphia. I had various, sort of peer groups. I was into various hobbies or whatever. And it's like, when you're around a bunch of people who aren't libertarians, you're kind of always biting your tongue, or you're kind of always talking about things in a different way. And it's like, it's really nice to have, whatever your hobbies are, it's a bunch of libertarians, a bunch of people who are kind of, sharing your values coming from where you're at. And there's this for everything. There's events and shows, not always at the scale of PorkFest, but a lot of what you're experiencing at PorkFest, you can experience on like a weekly or a monthly basis, And I've seen so many people who moved from other areas, and they're like, I met more libertarians in a week in New Hampshire than I did in 5 years or other various long time periods where they lived. And seriously, for me, it would literally be 1 week versus 5 years in Philadelphia. I met more libertarians in 1 week in New Hampshire than 5 years in Philadelphia. And so it's very easy to do this. If you're I talked about families easier, but if you're younger and you're maybe you're just coming out of college, it's so easy to move into the Manchester area or to the Seacoast area, and you're almost in like a college class, because there's always like so many people. There's like a cohort. You've got your peers who all moved in at the same time, or you've got places like the Quill and the Shell, these social clubs where there's events all of the time. So it's very easy, because it can be hard. I've moved several times in my life, and when you're moving somewhere else, you don't know anyone. And all of the various stuff that's been set up by the various institutions in New Hampshire, it's very easy to make friends, to make acquaintances. And Free Staters, honestly, they're like creepy about it. Let's be honest, if you've met Free Staters, like, you're eerily nice. Like, this is Mormon levels of politeness, and it makes me a little bit uncomfortable. It's cool. It's actually really cool, of course, right? Like, it does feel like that kind of thing. There's a very high level of social cohesion and social trust among Free Staters. And while I've never been a Mormon and I've never hung out with the Amish, like, I think it is comparable to these kinds of things, right? No one really worries, again, similar, like at PorkFest, right? Like, I know libertarians like locking their stuff up and being super secure and everything, at least a lot of them, but like, are you really worried if you leave, your wallet out of your campsite, you leave your phone out of your campsite? Like, no one's worried. We all, we trust each other. And so that's what things you'll find, like, coming into the community. People really want to be helpful. And actually, since a lot of people in this group are here or listening to this are presumably on that journey, one of my strongest encouragements would just be to accept this, take the help. I know as libertarians, like we really like doing things by ourselves, but like let the Free State Project, let Free Staters move you in, when you move. Like if people are offering to do things, take it. We all, as the people who are here as Free Staters, I know there were so many people when I moved, who helped me, who welcomed me. Like everyone feels this sort of like obligation and to pay it forward, and people want to do that. Okay, so really take that support from the community. Take those opportunities. Yeah, you might be able to do it yourself, but it's a good way of kind of, it's a win-win to be taking that, doing that kind of thing. All right, I'm definitely not going to go the full time, so start thinking of your questions. I would love to hear people's where they're at in their move, why they might not want to be moving. But before we get to that, I want to talk about one of the biggest reasons to move. I've hinted at this in some of the other points. And I want to talk about sort of, we could call it the psychology of living in New Hampshire, sort of the differences in your psyche and sort of how you'll feel. I think this is one of the biggest ones. Whether it's PorkFest or another libertarian event, like I was just out at Reno, for the Libertarian National Convention. And it's the same kind of thing. You're around a bunch of libertarians, right? And same at PorkFest. And everyone kind of feels this way, especially the people who don't have this regularly in their lives. There's this sense in which a lot of, this sense of relief in kind of being around people who hold similar values to us. There's this sense of like, it just feels good. And it's not because you were hiding something necessarily when you're not surrounded by libertarians, but it's just a bit more comfortable. I remember this, I don't know how long it took, but shortly after I moved to New Hampshire, because this was new for me, and I had experienced it maybe briefly at events, but like I remember living in New Hampshire and this feeling of like, I would go downtown to get a coffee, to the coffee shop, and I would run into a libertarian. Or I would go into the grocery store, and I would run into a libertarian. Or I would go to the grocery store, and I wouldn't run into a libertarian, but I would see a porcupine sticker on a car in the parking lot. And there's this sense of like feeling like you're not an alien, or you're not, and I think this feels really good. I think there's also a really good psychological feeling that comes from being in alignment with what you believe. You're here, you believe these libertarian things, and it feels very good to be in alignment with that. You are living in accordance with what you believe. You are furthering what you believe. To me, I definitely get a sense of purpose in my own life from being a libertarian, from kind of furthering libertarian values, and there's a sense of fulfillment that comes from doing that and from doing that here. And then the final sort of psychological one is, I don't know, do you guys like winning? I really like winning. Winning feels way better than losing. Losing doesn't feel good. And when I lived in Pennsylvania, and I think most areas of the country, you've been losing constantly. You've been losing nonstop. I'm sorry, but this is the truth. And even here, we've got a long way to go. But we're actually winning. We're actually achieving things. We're actually moving things in the positive direction. And that feels really, really good. And so I think that, there's a lot of reasons. I think I'm a happier person living in New Hampshire than I was living outside of New Hampshire. And I think there's a lot of various factors, that lead to that. So I think I've covered my 4 major areas. What I really want to encourage people, I think, libertarians like arguments. They like engaging in these kinds of things intellectually. The truth is, where you live, similar to your romantic partner and many other important life decisions, aren't actually best made intellectually. Intellectually can be a part of it, but you should be listening to your intuition. You should be trusting your emotions. These are emotional decisions. They're not intellectual ones. You can't reason yourself into being a happy person. You can't reason yourself into being a fulfilled person. You can attempt to use reason to understand, oh, here's how my personality works. You know, here's some choices I could make that would make me happier, maybe. But you can't reason yourself into this stuff. And so I think like you shouldn't be trying to reason yourself into moving to New Hampshire. You should try. What you should do is wherever you're at, you should take the next step, and you should kind of listen to your intuition and your subjective kind of judgment about it. To kind of, I think you are better off making these kinds of decisions at a gut level than a logical level. And I say this as a very logical person. I logically believe that this is the right way to decide these kinds of things. And so take that next step. Obviously, everyone here has visited New Hampshire since you're at PorcFest, but if you're listening online and you haven't visited New Hampshire, come and visit. If you've visited, visit again. Make sure that you're joining the groups. There is a group for everything. So get in the general groups, get in the Discord, but also find out the groups for whatever you're interested in. If you're into farming, join the Free State Farmers group, okay? There's a board game group, there's a group, everything that libertarians like, you know? So start doing these things and start taking these next steps. And experience it and see how, you know, and see how it makes you feel. And go to the smaller stuff. You know, if you have a family, go out to one of the family meetups. If you're into whatever you're into, you know, there's potluck dinners. The homesteaders have potluck dinners. And like take these opportunities, take these next steps. If you've been here at PorcFest, you know, for the last 6 days, you're probably feeling very good. I'm feeling very optimistic. I was feeling optimistic before PorcFest, but I'm feeling really great. It feels very good to live in New Hampshire, and it feels like we are on the path to liberty in our lifetime. So thank you. Okay, if we could now queue up in order of how skeptical we are about moving to New Hampshire, and let the most skeptical people towards the front of the line.
Yeah, you mentioned the federal income tax. So I guess my question is, how likely do you think secession is?
So I'll say this. It was 3% of Americans participated in the American Revolution. 1% of New Hampshire is now free staters, okay? So multiply by 3, kind of see where we are. I'm ambivalent on that. Like I think either whether it's hard secession or soft secession, there's an ability for New Hampshire to get concessions, and I care most about getting those, regardless of sort of the you know, the path that it takes. Yeah.
I already moved here, but it was difficult. I moved last year. I moved here last year, but it was kind of difficult. So I think people should remain skeptical because we need more inventory, I think. And what is the Free State Project's approach to changing zoning laws?
To changing what?
Zoning laws. Zoning laws.
Yeah, I absolutely agree that this is an issue. This is an area where we're behind. There was a bill that was very close last year that was going to do it at the state level. So I think there are efforts being made here. And there are places you can move in New Hampshire now. They tend to be more rural, where you can like basically do wherever you want. But this is an area where there absolutely needs to be more work done here.
All right.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, that's a big issue for Jason Sorens. And like, I mean, one of the cool things here, and actually, if there's a really strong reason to move, and also these are the people that tend to have a lot of impact. If you are the kind of person who is like very into politics, very nerdy about politics, wants to improve the laws, it's incredibly viable. There are people in this room who submit laws, and you can go up and talk to them, and you can be like, can we try doing a law like this? You know, it's very, very viable. It's like shockingly easy to do that. You might not be convinced of how easy it is if you're not here, but if you are the kind of person who is very knowledgeable, kind of wonky about various areas, it's absolutely possible to find a state rep, work with a state rep, and try to improve something.
I'm just curious. I live in Las Vegas, and we have had an insane influx in the past 5 years. Our purple state has turned very blue. We're hoping maybe things change. Do you guys have a problem with people fleeing Boston or anything and coming here and trying to turn your state like they're trying to turn Nevada?
Yeah, I think this is a really great question in terms of how will things play out over time. I will say it doesn't necessarily affect what's available to you tomorrow, but in terms of engaging with the substance of the question, the evidence is pretty strong, both anecdotally and in data-based ways that this isn't happening in New Hampshire. New Hampshire's population increased last year by around 10 to 15,000 people on net. Of the people of that 10 to 15,000 that had a party affiliation, it was something like 90 to 10 Republican to Democrat in terms of major party affiliations, as well as a bunch of undeclareds. But in terms of people that had one, it was like 90 to 10. There's not really a reason. And one of the reasons I talked, this is more big picture, I talked about this yesterday, but like the New Hampshire brand of New Hampshire being that crazy libertarian state is only getting stronger and stronger. And so, there's not much of a reason for someone with strong political preferences that are antithetical to libertarianism to move here. I'm sure it happens at the margins, and of course we still have, whoever Dartmouth is bringing in, but I think the trends on net are very much in our favor.
As a Free State native myself, I spend a lot of time talking to potential movers, and one thing I notice is we have a significant number of people who are interested in moving here and are working in the tech field, which I know nothing about. I don't work in that field. As someone who operates a business in that space, what can you talk about as far as maybe some of the advantages of working in the tech field in New Hampshire?
Yeah, well, probably it's definitely the most common field for Free Staters to be in. So you'll have lots of colleagues and lots of peers. If you have a remote job, if you have a remote job and you're a libertarian, I don't know why you would be anywhere else. Whether you want city living or rural living, it's all available to you, and you get all of the benefits that are outside of work, from the rest of that. You're gonna have low tax. New Hampshire has no income tax. So you're not gonna, if you're working in tech and you have a remote job, your income tends to be above the median, above average, and so you'll probably be saving money on your taxes. So those should be like the easiest people to to convince. You don't have to find a new job, And if you're in tech and you do need a new job, there's an incredible amount of tech jobs, both jobs in the state as well as jobs in the in the Boston metro.
All right, I have a hypothetical question. I'm really interested in moving, and someone else may not be interested in moving. It may or may not be my wife. What's your best argument or your 3 bullet points that you would tell this person hypothetically asking for a friend?
Yeah, you should hypothetically take your wife on a nice drive through the mountains, take her to a nice restaurant, and maybe hang out with another Free State couple of similar age and social inclinations as yours. Like, this is really what it's not. Your wife is not going to be convinced by policy. Take your wife to the playground, okay? That's what that's what I really recommend. And this is again why visits are really important, okay? So you're not going to persuade your significant other by arguing with her. What you should do is take her on a nice vacation to the beautiful state of New Hampshire, and then stop by to a couple of events.
Yeah, so one of your big pitches was that here is where libertarians can win. There's obviously a bunch of libertarians and libertarian-leaning people who say, no, that's Florida or Texas or something like that. What's the quick way to convince them that, no, New Hampshire's really the way we're winning?
Again, people who visit both Florida and New Hampshire aren't choosing Florida. There was a guy at PorkFest tweeted yesterday. He was like, I was 50-50 on Florida and New Hampshire, and now I'm in on New Hampshire after visiting PorkFest. So this is, I think, the experience that everyone is going to have. Where you live is so important. Okay, so if you are thinking about moving, you have to visit New Hampshire. Don't stop. Don't make this decision remotely. Spend some time, contact the Free State Project, because we'll also set you up with people. This is the other thing. You can do your own personal introduction in the various groups, but you can also contact us and say, hey, I'm looking, whatever various niche thing you're looking for. If you contact the Free State Project, whatever, I'm an electrical engineer and whatever, we'll try to find the Free Stater. There's so many of us. We'll try to find that person and help, sort of pair you up. Wait, I feel like I got off track from the main. Oh, here's the other sort of Florida or Texas versus New Hampshire kind of thing. So New Hampshire's population is 1/20th that of Florida's, or 1/18th or something like this, right? So if what matters is ultimately sort of the density of libertarians in a particular place, as long as we're winning 1 out of 18 libertarians, our density is accelerating ahead of theirs. So I think we're winning way more than 1 out of 18. Additionally, we're kind of selecting for the people who care the most. We're kind of selecting for people who are the most active. Like if you're gonna choose Florida over New Hampshire, you're probably choosing it over something like weather concerns or maybe lifestyle concerns, like you really want, there's something there you want. Whereas the people who are selecting, who are oriented towards winning,
Yeah.
if you're oriented towards winning, you're gonna choose New Hampshire. I don't think there's really a competition there.
Thank you.
Hello. I arrived in Manchester during Furry Fest when that was happening there. So my first impression of New Hampshire was a bunch of guys in animal uniforms.
How do you know there were guys?
But beyond all that, like I really love it. The issue is I'm kind of poor. I'm kind of broke. I'm kind of above minimum wage. What options are available for someone like me?
That's a great question. So I do think it's like total cost of living in New Hampshire is it's maybe a bit higher than average, but it's around average, so it is achievable. There's lots of if you need a roommate, there are lots of free staters in a similar situation. We have housing groups can help you find a roommate. I think if that's your situation, you want to be getting networked the most. There may be, you get friendly with some free staters, maybe maybe your income's double in a year or two, because there's a lot of that happening. So many people find jobs and get those opportunities. So my number one thing would be to join the groups. fsp.org/connect has them all listed, but the Facebook group and the Discord are probably the two biggest ones. And there's also a housing group for finding roommates and for doing that kind of thing. So I would look at that and just introduce yourself and explain your situation. Like as I was saying earlier, like free staters, they want to help. They want to be supporting that thing. So whether it's finding a roommate or potentially finding a different job or whatever that might be that might help that work, or even just helping come up with a plan. You can post in that group and say, look, I have $1,500 a month in disposable income. I need to be able to cover rent, this, and this. Can you guys help me figure out how I can make that work in New Hampshire? And I think people would help you. So what I would say is, and this goes for everyone, like join the Facebook group, join the Discord, introduce yourself and explain your situation a little bit, what you're looking for, what you're curious about, that kind of thing. And there are going to be people who are going to engage with you and help you. People want to do that, or they'll find the person who can.
So my impression is that a lot of American libertarians take New Hampshire for granted, but a lot of international libertarians know that New Hampshire is where it's at. So do you have any sort of suggestions on what international libertarians can do to perhaps get here, like what sort of tips and things like that?
This is an unfortunate one because this is mostly a federal issue and what we can't do that much. What I will say is we're not narcs, Not. We're not going to call the feds. I know of no concrete example of a marriage happening for immigration purposes. I have zero concrete evidence of that happening, but I've heard it's happened. I've heard that's happened. Gay marriage is legal in New Hampshire. Cryptocurrency is anonymous. I'm just saying. Let's make this happen, people. It's the same as immigrating anyway. Like, there's nothing specific about New Hampshire, right? So we can potentially point you towards a libertarian-friendly immigration attorney, but unfortunately, immigrating to the United States is more challenging and complicated than it should be. And that's so. I wish I had a better answer. My answer here is like, if you're comfortable with like pushing the limits, come for a vacation and see what happens. But otherwise, you've got to kind of go through the proper channels. A lawyer can potentially help, but there's no one weird trick to immigrating to the United States. Yeah.
Hey, Jeremy.
Thank you. No, I'm not done.
There's just an announcement from 12 to 2. They have a Meet the Regions. In the Porcupine real estate tent over there. So if you want to meet people in the certain regions, go over there after this talk, and there'll be people from every region, and they're all a little different. So yeah, we also have the photo at 2. But could you talk about how like some of these community centers that have sprung up, like the Shell and the Quill, kind of galvanizes people in certain areas and provides a space for people when like COVID's happening and all that stuff.
Yeah, so this is definitely something that exists in New Hampshire and I don't think exists anywhere else. We have a variety of community centers. I think we're at least 4. These are something like community centers or social clubs. Some of them have membership fees, some of them do not. They tend to have regular events. Those will be events with speakers. Those can be entertainment. They are generally spaces that you can just use. So if you want to host a class, if you want to have a weekly knitting group, if you want to have a Japanese language club, if you want to do swing dancing, this kind of stuff will happen at these kinds of places. It's a great, I go to events all the time as someone who's been here for 7 years, and then also if you're new, it's a really easy way. There's always stuff going on, so it's also an easy way to be, kind of meeting people. So I think this is definitely something New Hampshire has to offer that you can't really find anywhere else. And this is again, why coming for a visit, and you can come and check out these spaces. You can go. There's stuff. You can go onto the calendars, and there's stuff happening at the Shell and the Quill, nonstop. FSP.org/calendar, by the way, in general, lists an incredible amount of events. Anything listed there, you're welcome to basically just show up at, or they'll be in the text if they want you to RSVP. But generally, you can just show up to anything listed there, and so that's another thing you can do to find a bunch of these.
So I know you mentioned you beat Florida out by a lot. One question that none of the free staters have really been too forthright on is, it seems to me New Hampshire shit the bed on COVID restrictions. I know that you guys had your own parallel stuff where you got together, everything was normal, but it wasn't normal out in the world. So is there any, thing where you're like, next time this happens, we're not doing this again?
Well, there have been, so third parties rate New Hampshire as one of the least restrictive states, like generally around something like 5th, and that ignores some of the stuff that's difficult to measure objectively, where like New Hampshire laws subjectively generally had a bunch of like out clauses, like any business, like there may have been something about essential businesses suggesting that they close, but then the definition of essential would be very expansive, or would basically be like, well, I'm essential, and not just, there was never any actual challenges to this stuff. But I don't want to be in the position of defending it too much, because it certainly wasn't great. I don't think it was great anywhere though. Like Florida literally stopped people from crossing the border at one point. A bunch of this stuff happened everywhere. And in terms of what we've done since then, we have seen reforms. We've seen emergency power reforms where the governor is no longer allowed to just continue to expand emergency powers. We've seen a bunch of stuff around around mandates and this kind of thing. And again, I also think the social aspect, the network aspect, is not to be underlooked, because I don't know what state you could have lived in and gotten a bunch of people together for a dinner party or that kind of thing, in the middle of 2020. We held Pork Fest in the middle of 2020. Okay, so in the middle of 2020, every other libertarian event was canceled that year. So, I don't think this is one of those things where you've got sort of the political reality of what are the laws, and then you've got sort of the social reality of what are people doing. And the social reality of COVID, what were people doing? Everyone, that was everywhere, right? I do also think New Hampshire specifically, the sort of cultural vibe here, it is pretty respectful. It is pretty pro-social, like not just among the Free Staters. So I do think there were a lot of New Englanders who had that attitude of like, well, wearing a mask is just the polite thing to do. There wasn't a lot of vociferous mask, the Karen screaming. I didn't see a bunch of that. Like, my wife went around without wearing a mask grocery shopping the entirety of COVID. Never had anyone yell at her. But there were a lot of people wearing them. But I think that's the kind of New England way of people want to be respectful, but also kind of see things as being their personal choice. So, yeah. All right, well, you got one more question? All right, we're going to do this as the last question.
I guess to follow up on that, what's more important to you, how the state treats you or how your neighbors treat you?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, look, and this also gets back to why I think, look, I think New Hampshire wins the debate on like what's the freest state today, but I think this is like also kind of a silly way to be making the decision, because come back to that fact of like the continuum of what's possible. It's really big. It's really big. And the range of all of the states in the U.S., even the freest state in terms of what's possible, we're very far from that. And so I even though I think New Hampshire wins, I don't think that's like logically the right way to be making the decision. I think it's like, what are the trends? How does this stuff play out? What's available to me today? And these kinds of things. And I think New Hampshire comes out even better using this type of analysis. I'm going to end it because I really want people here who are curious about moving to go to Meet the Regions. It's a really great chance. The regions are very different. It's a great event and a chance to go and meet all of those people. If you're interested in speaking more with me, I'll be up at the LP Mises tent at 1 p.m. So I'll also be up there if you're interested in speaking with me further. But otherwise, if you're curious about moving, I would really encourage you to go over to the Porcupine Realty tent and check out the regions. Thank you.